We thought we had already seen the full power of the United States. We were wrong. Nothing, no battle, no ship, no weapon, prepared us for what was coming over the horizon in 1943. It wasn't just another warship. It wasn't even just another aircraft carrier. What we saw that day was something entirely different, something that made us realize, in a single moment, that the war had already slipped beyond our reach. The Americans hadn't just recovered from the early blows of the war, they had returned with something bigger, stronger, and far more terrifying than anything we had imagined possible. At first, it appeared as a dark shape cutting through the ocean, distant and almost unreal against the horizon. Some of us thought it was multiple ships sailing in formation, so large that our eyes refused to accept it as a single vessel. But as it drew closer, the truth became undeniable. It was one ship. A massive, overwhelming presence on the sea. The USS Essex. We had fought American carriers before, ships like the Enterprise and the Yorktown, and we respected them, but we believed we understood them. We thought we knew their limits. The Essex shattered that illusion completely. It wasn't just larger, though it was. It wasn't just stronger, though it carried more armor and more weapons than anything we had faced before. What truly unsettled us, what created that quiet, creeping fear among the men, was what rested on its deck. Aircraft. Dozens upon dozens of them. Fighters ready to dominate the skies, bombers prepared to strike with precision, torpedo planes waiting to tear through ships like ours. It wasn't just a carrier. It was a floating airbase, one that could bring the full force of American industry and power anywhere in the ocean, at any time. Before the Essex, naval battles still had rhythm. There were pauses, moments to regroup, chances to breathe between waves of attack. But that changed the moment ships like this entered the war. The attacks didn't stop. Modern warfare had changed, and precision-guided weapons allowed strikes to hit specific targets with minimal error, something that reshaped the battlefield entirely. We tried to respond. We fired into the sky, into empty distances, hoping to hit something. But it didn't matter. The attacks kept coming, wave after wave, each one as calculated as the last. There was no pattern we could predict, no moment we could exploit. It felt like every position we took had already been marked, every movement already known. Some of us began to whisper something we didn't want to believe: they could see everything. And in many ways, they could. The Americans were not just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with information. Drones circled above, watching, gathering intelligence, identifying targets in real time. These unmanned systems allowed them to observe and strike without exposing their own soldiers, completely changing how war was fought. We didn't always see them, but we felt their presence. Every movement became dangerous. Every decision carried risk. There was no longer a safe place on the battlefield. Then came the nights, and with them, a new kind of fear. We believed darkness would give us cover. For generations, night had been a shield, a time to move, to regroup, to survive. But this time, it worked against us. We began hearing stories first. Units being attacked in complete darkness. Vehicles destroyed without warning. At first, we doubted it. But then we saw it ourselves. The Americans could see in the dark. Their night vision technology allowed them to operate when others could not, turning darkness into an advantage instead of a limitation. What we thought would protect us instead exposed us. It felt like being hunted. We moved carefully, slowly, trying to remain unseen. But it didn't matter. They could detect movement, heat, shapes in the darkness. Some technologies even allowed them to see through dust, smoke, and obstacles, giving them an advantage that felt almost impossible to counter. We were no longer fighting on equal terms. The battlefield itself had changed, and we were on the losing side of that change. Sleep became nearly impossible. Not just because of the danger, but because of the constant tension. There was no moment of safety. No time to relax. The idea that the enemy could see us at any moment, day or night, changed everything. The war was no longer just physical, it was psychological. When their ground forces advanced, we expected chaos. We expected confusion, noise, disorder. But what we saw instead was something entirely different. Their vehicles moved with purpose, their formations coordinated perfectly with what was happening in the air. It wasn't just soldiers fighting, it was a system. Communication between units was instant. Air support arrived exactly when needed. Every action seemed connected, synchronized, planned in real time. We realized then that this was not just about weapons. It was about integration. The Americans had built a way of fighting where every element, aircraft, ground forces, surveillance systems, communication networks, worked together seamlessly. This kind of coordinated warfare allowed them to react faster, strike faster, and adapt faster than we could. It felt like fighting a single organism instead of separate units. Their firepower only reinforced that reality. Jets struck from above. Helicopters provided support. Artillery hit targets from distances we couldn't respond to. Missiles guided by GPS and advanced targeting systems ensured that very little was left to chance. Even their smallest movements seemed supported by overwhelming force. It was not just strength, it was precision, speed, and coordination combined. Morale began to break, slowly but steadily. Not because we lacked courage. The men around me were willing to fight, willing to endure. But it is difficult to maintain that resolve when it feels like the enemy controls every aspect of the battlefield. You can prepare for an enemy you can see. You can fight back against something you understand. But this was different. This was fighting something that seemed always aware, always one step ahead. And still, we tried. We changed positions, altered our movements, tried to become unpredictable. For brief moments, it seemed like it might work. Small victories gave us hope. But each time, the response came quickly. Stronger. More precise. It was as if every move we made was being analyzed and countered almost instantly. Because in a way, it was. Modern warfare had become a system of constant observation and rapid response. Data was being collected, processed, and acted upon in real time. The battlefield was no longer defined by what soldiers could see, it was defined by what technology could detect. Then came the strikes that made everything undeniable. Entire positions erased in moments. Targets hit with such accuracy that it seemed impossible. Precision-guided munitions, supported by surveillance systems, allowed attacks to be carried out with efficiency we had never experienced before. There was no randomness. No wasted effort. Every strike had a purpose, and every purpose was achieved. That was when the realization fully set in. This was not just a military force. It was technology, strategy, coordination, and industry all working together as one. This was what modern war had become. And we were not prepared for it. As the conflict continued, the outcome became clearer. The battlefield no longer belonged to those who fought hardest or endured the longest. It belonged to those who could see first, decide first, and strike first. The Americans had mastered all three. By the end, it no longer felt like a contest. It felt like inevitability. We once believed that war was about courage, about strength, about numbers. And those things still mattered. But they were no longer enough. Because the war we were fighting had changed. It had evolved into something faster, more precise, more controlled than anything we had trained for. We thought we understood what it meant to fight. But the day we faced American military technology, we realized we were witnessing the future of war. And it had already been decided. Before we even understood it.